My apologies. I stopped recording for some random reason. I'm not really sure why. I think I hit a button. So we were in the middle of talking about Quintilian's perfect orator. And he thought you need to be a good speaker, of course, but you also need to be a good person. So the definition of rhetoric for Quintilian really takes into account Aristotle and honestly a little bit of Plato, and Cicero, because he says, yeah, you must be good at speaking, but you also have to be a good person. Now, remember that Aristotle talked about that one thing, goodwill towards your audience. If you have goodwill towards your audience, they will see that and are more likely to be persuaded. Well, Quintilian takes that a step further and says, you don't just need to show that you have goodwill, you need to demonstrate that you are a good person, an ethical person, a person who is going to give out the right information, the correct information to help you in the best way possible, which of course then gets into that idea from Cicero of training people to take or maintain their power. So Quintilian wasn't really all that different, even though he was writing in a completely different context from Cicero. He still based his works on the classical Greeks and on Cicero's work, which of course was based on classical Greeks. And he took into consideration not just the steps of being a great orator, again, the 5 canons, but also the character of the speaker. Now, one of the things that I think that Quintilian actually spends time on that a lot of people ignore is something that Aristotle brought up, and it sort of gets like brushed off in Aristotle, Isocrates, and Cicero in a lot of ways. It gets kind of brushed off because they put it under this umbrella of goodwill, and that is credibility. The credibility of the speaker. Credibility is made up of 2 components: character and competence. Character is who you are as a person, whether or not you show goodwill, of course, but also your reputation or your establishment that you know what you're talking about. So sometimes when people, when I first went to college, I might have mentioned this, my mother was just mortified because I wore jeans to school. And in her time, jeans were for working out in the farm fields of Middle Pennsylvania, right? For me, they were a way to dress up, and you put on a really nice shirt and some nice shoes and you were able to dress it up, and that was good enough to go to class in. We also used to stand when we spoke to our teachers. These days, you all, even if you're giving a formal presentation, do not pay any attention to how you dress necessarily. I shouldn't make a generalization like that, but the majority of people I've seen don't pay a lot of attention to how they're dressed. They don't make it a formal process. And honestly, to me, that's mortifying, right? But we adjust our standards to the culture of the day, right? But there's one thing we don't adjust, and that's what it looks like to your audience. So you see people on Fox News or on MSNBC or on whatever it is that you're watching, and they are dressed nicely, at least from the top up. I know a lot of news casters, a lot of news readers, and some journalists who will wear pajama bottoms and then like a suit coat on top. That doesn't really happen too much anymore because now they keep shooting the full body shots, which I find fascinating. But as someone who was in the news when it was very staid and stoic, where you just sat like this and you delivered a speech and you delivered the news and you never showed them what was below the desk. For me, it would be awkward if somebody said, hey, I'm going to show you from the waist down as well, because like, oh man, I got to put on like dress pants instead of the jeans I'm wearing, or the pajama bottoms I'm wearing, or the stretchy things that I'm wearing. I have to put on shoes that are nice instead of just wearing my tennis shoes or whatever it is that I'm doing. So for me, that's an adjustment. And there's always these adjustments. But when I see someone who comes to speak and they're dirty, or they don't look like they put much thought into their appearance, they didn't even comb their hair, or they look what we used to call sloppy, that you're wearing, sweatpants and a sweatshirt and tennis shoes that are used for leisure, not for work. My ability to consider them as credible is very difficult. And that all goes into character. I mean, there's a reason why Donald Trump always wears a suit, coat, and a tie. There's a reason why Joe Biden, President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, President Clinton, President Reagan, President George W. Bush, whoever. There's a reason they dress like they do. And that is to present themselves as powerful, knowledgeable, and of good character. Most of the time it works. Okay? The other is competence. So in credibility, we've got character and we've got competence. And competence is establishing your credibility as a knowledgeable person. So the sources that you use tell me how credible your information is, which tells me how credible your argument is. So I told you today that I sat down and I went through looking for quintillion just to kind of get a sense of what was out there if I just Google. And the truth of the matter is, the first 5 links that came up, none of them were sufficient. Some of them were just flat out wrong. And in reading that, you understand that the sources of that information are probably not very good. And therefore, if I use them, my credibility will not be very good. I hope that makes sense to you, because when you speak in public, it's important that you establish credibility, but it's also important that you do it when you write. And I don't mean that you write, I am credible because this, and this. I'm just saying, in the way that you present your argument, in this, and the sources that you use will indicate how credible your point is. I hope that helps a little bit. And that is this idea of ethics, of the ethical speaker, of not just goodwill, but of being a good person. Before you can practice rhetoric, you have to be a good person, which, by the way, is not that far from what Aristotle says. Remember, he says if you're using rhetoric for lies, then you're not practicing rhetoric. You're practicing lying. You're practicing coercive persuasion. You're not practicing rhetoric. Rhetoric requires that there be something good behind it. Now, I know probably what you're thinking. Some of you are like, well, they refer to Joe Biden's rhetoric as empty, flowery language, and people say Trump's rhetoric is fiery, or whatever it is that they use to explain it. True, that is going to come up soon. Actually, in the next 2 weeks, when we talk about how rhetoric went from having this great, detailed, in-depth reputation as a philosophy and turned into something you just toss off as lies. A lot of people say, oh, a rhetorical question is when you don't want an answer. No, that's not what a rhetorical question is. A rhetorical question is a question that makes a point. The reason why it doesn't need to be answered is because you are making an argument with it that, hopefully if it's a good enough argument, it can't be answered. So think about that a little bit, because I've been reading your, or obviously I read your, what is rhetoric, or what did you think rhetoric was before this course. And so that's where I'm basing a lot of this portion of things on. Anyway, quintillion also reifies or reaffirms the 5 canons, obviously, but the tweak at the beginning of being a good person who then speaks well is actually a huge change, a shift in how it is that we think about rhetoric. Now, hold on one second, because there's another piece of this that's going to bring us right around to the beginning of this lecture. And that is this. A good person, someone normally got defined as a good person if they were a member of court, if they had money, if they were a senator, if they were the family of the senator. Do you see where I'm going with this? So by him adding that one piece, he was trying to justify, or he successfully justified teaching rhetoric in a time when the emperor was fearful of educating the public. But if Quintilian said, we're only going to educate those who are good enough, then all of a sudden it was okay. So very interesting, right? That Quintilian says, I'm just going to write for the rich and famous, or the well-established, or the educated, whatever. And then he does so by first saying, you must be a good person speaking well, and since you're of the higher echelons of class, you must be good people. It gave him an opportunity to teach rhetoric when he otherwise would not have had that opportunity. I hope that makes sense to you. He attempted to do what Cicero was doing, but he was doing it in a very centralized governmental system of power. All right, well, I hope that helps. Again, I'm going to put that test up tomorrow. It will be available until 11:28 p.m., so over 7 days to take this exam. Do it at your leisure, but don't forget to do it, okay? It's an important piece to your overall grade. As always, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or threats, let me know. If you're going to be at the Sertoma duck races down in Ozark this weekend, I might see you there. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next Tuesday.